Memorial Day doorbuster deals are here at Lowe's. Right now, Rewards members save $80 on the Master Forge 4-burner gas grill, now just $149. Plus, Rewards members save $900 on the Lowe's exclusive Hisense French door refrigerator, now only $999. Lowe's, we help, you save. Valid through 5/26. Selection varies by location. While supplies last. See Lowe's.com for more details. Program subject to terms and conditions. Details at Lowe's.com/terms. Subject to change.
You're listening to the winning literary show, Off the Shelf Books Talk Radio. Live with host Denise Turney, author of the books Long Walk Up, Portia, Love Pour Over Me, Spiral, Love Has Many Faces, and Rosetta's Great Hope. Turn up your dial and get ready for a blast of feature author interviews, 411 on book festivals, writing conferences, and so much more. Ready? Let's go.
Welcome to this Saturday's Off the Shelf. I always like to start every show by saying for our listeners who've been with us for over 18 years, I just thank you and thank you and thank you. And if this is your first time listening to Off the Shelf, I just want to let you know that, yes, you are listening to the winning book podcast show, Off the Shelf, and we're so happy to have you here with us. I want to start this show with a quote, and this quote is source anonymous. To bring about change, you must not be afraid to take the first step. That's where we often get stopped. To bring about change, you must not be afraid to take the first step. And you got to be persistent and try new things like our awesome guest just did for our show today. But before I introduce you to our show, I just want to, it is something that I've been doing for, I think I started, somebody gifted me some journals for Christmas. And I'm going back probably over 2 decades. And it's really life changing to get your emotions out and thoughts and write down your dreams and just capture your amazing life story. So if you value journaling and you want to do that inner work and the work where it's non-defensive, it's something you can read that really strikes a chord and there's no walls up so it can do that good work. I do encourage you can get that through song, poetry, short stories, writing snippets. If that's valuable to you, I encourage you to get a copy of Heal Gorgeous, Wisdom Within You Knows the Way. You can get it in paperback, and I think it's also available in ebook and maybe in audiobook as well. I encourage you to get a copy of Heal Gorgeous, Wisdom Within You Knows the Way by yours truly, Denise Turney, today. And now, drum roll, let us go and meet our very special off the shelf guest. And today's guest is Stephen Cline. Stephen is a multi-talented artist. He is a musician, photographer, composer, and book author, very creative. And additionally, Stephen is a retired college professor who taught creative writing and literature. He studied art, even working in James Hubbell's studio. And in addition to being a novelist, Stephen has worked as a cartoonist and an illustrator, which really could come in handy, especially if you do those. I forget what they call those novels, graphic novels. And as a musician, he has performed across the West Coast, the Midwest, and in Hawaii. And Stephen Cline is the author of the novels The Last Book, The Last Orange Grove, The Queen's English, and Echoes Over Water. Please check Stephen Cline out. And that's Cline with a C. Please check Stephen Cline out online at stephencline.com. STEPHEN, C as in cat, LINE.com. And again, that's STEPHENCLINE.com. We're just so happy to have Mr. Cline join us on Off the Shelf Books this morning. Welcome to Off the Shelf, Stephen.
Thank you. What a lovely introduction. I'm super happy to be here talking to you. Thanks for inviting me.
And glad to have you here. So as we kick off this morning, today's show, can you tell Off the Shelf listeners where you grew up and what life was like for you growing up.
Sure. I grew up in Manhattan Beach, California, uh, which would usually when I tell people that they go, "Oh," because it's become a very moneyed place. But when I was growing up, it was just middle class. The town was half empty. It was largely peopled by uh, families where the dad had been in World War II and come back and building houses on the GI Bill, and so it's just lots of middle class families. This is in the 50s and 60s, and in a beach town, and lots of empty lots, and we could walk to the beach, and so we had this very sort of beachy kind of life. And my dad was a great swimmer and body surfer, and so he had my brother and I on his back body surfing when we were tiny kids. And so it was a really lovely childhood. Lots of families, and back in those safe days when you could jump on your bike and ride a couple of miles away to play with your friends, and there were no worries. And my dad was a trumpet player. I mean, he had a real job, but he was also a trumpet player. And when it was time for us to come home for dinner, he would stand on the front porch and play reveille, a bugle call, and you could hear it miles away. We'd go up, time to go home. So,
Oh,
so,
how fun!
so
That sounds fun. I can know my dad used to do this whistle, and we knew when
yeah,
we were younger it was time to go in. Who
right.
or what, Stephen, inspired your love for writing books?
That's a good question. I would just say books. Um,
Hmm.
my parents were big readers. My mom was a psychology professor, and so she read all kinds of stuff, and she would periodically give me stuff that she thought I was ready for, some sci-fi book. It's time you read this, and kind of work me through stuff. My dad loved historical fiction, and I remember when I was, I don't know, junior high, he had his big collection of the Horatio Hornblower series of historical English sailing novels, and then so it was a reading household. And in seventh grade, I read the complete Sherlock Holmes, and then our school, my high school, was a really good public high school, a really great lit. So I had all the classic literature through the years. Um, and then when I was in college, um, I I was actually majoring in history and minoring in art, and so I've been involved in art all my life. But then uh, then I transferred to another school, and I just couldn't quite figure out what I wanted to major in. And then I realized, well, in a lit department, you get to read novels, so you get to read good books, and then
Mhm.
when you talk about them, there's really no wrong answers. So I thought, well, that sounds fun. So anyway, I've just been immersed in literature my whole life, and but then I've gone on to have different jobs and stuff, and after I got my BA, I realized that you can't do too much with a BA in English lit. So did a lot of other jobs. But then my mom talked me into going back to school and uh, uh, and getting my master's, and I did that, and that's when I started teaching college, which is what she told me. You've got all these talents and stuff, um, but if you're a college professor, you can use a lot of them in your job, but then you also have a ton of free time to in summers and stuff to
Okay,
develop
do your
your
writing.
art and stuff. So that's when I got really into writing when I was in grad school, and and uh, and then I started doing short uh, short pieces, both. I mean, I wrote some academic stuff that were published, and then I did a bunch of fiction pieces that I had out, and then some nonfiction pieces. So I just got the ball rolling, but it all comes out of my my family home and the reading, and
Hmm.
all my schooling, the reading. It just language.
Okay. Now, how does studying and teaching writing influence your actual novel writing today? You studied it, you taught it. How do you see it influencing the way you craft a novel today?
Yeah, good question. Um, in grad school, it was a double major, and so literature for sure, but it was also a rhetoric and composition, which really helps getting a job at a community college teaching composition. But it's the history of rhetoric is the history of writing, of communicating, of developing ideas, and so reading all that. I was just sort of immersed in that that process that's and that those ideas of developing ideas, developing logic, and that kind of thing. But around that same time, I received a National Endowment for the Humanities fellowship to go study for a summer the earliest versions of the Arthurian legends that are based on Celtic stories out of Wales. And they're really kind of primitive stories. They're not the sort of the Arthur stories that we've come to know. And so that opened the door to Celtic mythology for me and all these weird stories they have. And and so that kind of those two things, the studying of writing and how writing works and how it's put together, the studying of literature, and then the study of this Celtic mythology, it was like these little doors were opening. And then I started having ideas, and that process of having ideas is really a lot of what the last book is about. um,
Mm.
so then I just started following those ideas. And as you were talking about in your intro about journaling and stuff, I just started writing. You get these ideas and you go, oh, I don't know what that is, but I'm going to write it down. You
Mm-hmm.
know, and then it starts developing.
Yes. Can you introduce us to your novel, The Last Book? And I love that title. Can you please give our listeners an overview of the book, The
Sure.
Last Book?
It it takes place just slightly into the future, um, not specified, but just a little bit bumped up into the future. And the reason I did that is so I can introduce some more technology. So it's a college professor, surprise, and his name is Charles, and he also is a musician. You can see that a lot of times writers, and I think I've heard another one of your speakers talk about, you do draw from your personal experience,
Yes, yes.
so it's sort of a weird combination of autobiography and imagination,
Mm-hmm.
so so this guy Charles, he's also a musician, but he's an English prof, and he noodles around on guitar. And he goes into this music repair shop to get his guitar work done, and he meets this elderly gentleman. It's a real very old world shop, kind of dark and musty, and all these instruments everywhere. And this elderly gentleman greets him. It's like an old world atelier. Um, and so they have this lovely conversation, and they talk about stories. The old guy is talking about stories. That's what we humans do. We do stories, and Charles is going, huh? And the guy goes on to say, well, we go to work and we come home and we tell our family or spouse, whatever, of our day, a story of our day.
Mm-hmm.
And then we, in the evening, we read a book or watch TV, stories. And
Mm-hmm.
then we go to bed and we dream. What? Stories. So that's what we do. Humans do stories. They get together, how was your weekend? And what does your friend
Yeah.
do? Tells you a story. So
Yes.
we do stories. So they're having that conversation
Mm-hmm.
and they're really hitting it off. And then the old guy gives Charles this old book and says, I think you'd like this. Here, read this. And he takes it home. And the guy implies that it's a weird book, that there's something mysterious about it. But we never really do know the explanation of its mysteriousness. But
Mm.
he starts reading this book, and he reads a story that he really, really likes. And then he closes the book and he sees the title on the cover of the book fade away. And a new one pops up and he opens the book and it's a different
Oh.
story. And so
Hmm.
he reads that. And it happens like 3 or 4 times that night. He's just like, what the heck? This book is
Yes.
generating a new story every time. And it happens that every time I every story I really like. It's like it's really suited to me. So that's the property of the book. Every time you open it up, it's a
Interesting.
new story. And somehow that story just seems, to sort of really be, I don't know, slanted toward the reader, not overtly, but subtly. And so after a while, he starts feeling a little nervous about it. It's like, what's the deal with this anyway? And so he goes to visit the old guy who is sort of mysterious about it. He comes home and the book is gone, and he realizes that, oh, somebody has come in and stolen the book. And then that just brings him into this whole sort of exciting, weird thing where he finds out that different people want that book for different reasons. And he ends up uh, sort of allying himself with the old guy's daughter, who's grown up with that book. And they're both academics, and they both love literature, and they both are very into the mystery of literature, of of creativity, and they sort of identify with the different cultures that talked about muses, who you know inspire the artist to create. And but these other guys want the book, and they're technology guys, and they're trying to advance the world of technology, our dependence on it, and they think that the book will give them some sort of image of the world that they're trying to create. And so there's this whole cat and mouse kind of thing, and some real, I don't know, pretty intense
Mm.
conflict stuff going on, and bubbling underneath it is this budding romance. But really, the heart of the book, the heart of my book, is the mysteriousness of this book, and
Yes.
it comes to sort of symbolize for these guys that it's like this ancient wellspring of creativity, and it comes in. And the other reason I pushed it into the future a little bit is, it's coming at a time where people are reading fewer and fewer long form books, and this comes from my own teaching. You'd see these students would come in, and you say, "Well, what was the last book you read?" You know, and they'd all kind of like, "What would you read in school?" And it was like their responses were getting thinner and thinner, and I had the feeling like some of these people, the last book they read was The Cat in the Hat. So
Oh God.
there was, and that's probably the genesis of part of the book is that sense of like, well, that and just living in the the modern world.
Mhm.
You go anywhere, and what are people doing? They're looking at their phones.
Right.
And,
Yep.
and they're reading, yeah, but they're not reading anything long. They're not reading Dickens, you
Hmm.
know.
Hmm.
So it's playing with that. We are on a sort of a cusp in society, a societal change, and part of that change is our larger use of technology and our decreased um, use of really reading and writing for that matter, because
Hmm.
now you can make a video, you can
Yeah.
text. And
Yep.
um, so Charles goes on a couple of rants during the book about this. He's going, we're becoming a post-literate society, which you know you can make an argument for. Um,
Mm. So,
so anyway, that's the basis of the book. That's pretty much
so
it.
describe Charles Sutton. How old is he? You said he's a college professor. What drives him? What is his background like? And who is his romantic interest in the story?
Okay, well, he's a little bit anachronistic because he is uh, uh, maybe of a certain age. Maybe he's like in his late 40s, 50s. He does still sort of have one foot in the sort of older uh, ethos of as I grew up in, and as I was telling you earlier about going to schools where they were, very lit based, and uh, being very much book culture, and so that's kind of his background. But having been a professor for some time, he has seen that sort of decline and feeling like his job has changed as well. It's not to teach the great literature, it's not to teach the time periods so much, it's more to teach the skills. And having been I've taught a lot of, like freshman comp, basic writing kinds of stuff. And there is that sort of sense of like, just you're here to teach some basic skills. And so he struggles with that because he'd really rather teach the bigger literary stuff. And I've always felt myself is that people when people read this book, they go, oh, your vocabulary is so big. It's like, well, I don't know what to say about that. I didn't ever study vocabulary, but I have a big vocabulary, and it's because I grew up reading stuff.
Hmm.
I mentioned Charles Dickens. Those writers back in the day. They didn't mince words, to put it mildly.
Oh yes,
Um,
yep.
and so, I absorbed that. So I learned, sort of uh, complex sentence structure and stuff, not from my English classes, but from reading. So anyway, he's sort of that and sort of mindset, and so he feels a bit conflicted in his career, and in a little dubious about the changes in culture that seem so headlong. Let's race into the digital future, and now AI, and never mind that the AI may replace humans. So he has those feelings. So as to the romance thing, it's a gal's name is Celeste, and she is the daughter of the instrument repair guy, Mr. Lafke. And so she grew up with this book, and so she's been struggling against uh, the sort of tech thing too. She is an academic in literature and in lit crit, as we call it. But she's also minored in technology and IT. So her ex boyfriend is this tech wizard, and he turns out to be a bad guy, and he's the guy that
Mm.
is trying to get the book because he learned about it from her. And so she's the one that steals the book from Charles, but they end up getting
Oh.
together, and they sort of realize they're in some kind of war against these guys, and so they team up to sort of try to uh, you know subvert these tech guys in some of their more nefarious things, and they are nefarious indeed. And so as they work together, they find, through their commonalities, that they begin to have a relationship. But it's halting, and she's conflicted as well, and it's not smooth sailing.
Interesting. Without giving the story away, does anyone ever discover why this story keeps changing every time you go to reread the last books?
The answer simply is no.
Oh
And
wow.
and the thing about it, there are those who want to solve the puzzle, want to take the book apart or to figure it out. And Charles um, and Celeste, they're more of like, you know what? It's a mystery, and we're okay with that. There are mysteries in the world, and there is paradox, yeah, in the world where two things can be this true at the same time that are otherwise seemingly mutually uh, exclusive or contradictory. And so and that kind of gets back to what I was talking about earlier with where do ideas come from? Where, what is it? You can't pin down um, imagination. You can't pin down creativity. You know, it is, and so they're comfortable with that. Yeah, I mean, there's something sort of that pulls at you wanting to know, but ultimately they're like, it's a beautiful thing, mystery and paradox, and where the creativity comes from. So, and that part of that comes from my own sense of like, I don't know. People say, "Well, how can you be so creative?" And it's like, I don't know. Um, you get ideas, but
Yeah.
I have had when I was in grad school. I'll tell you this quick little story. I was working on my master's thesis, formal academic thing, and I was about halfway through it, and I was stuck. And just classic writer's block. I don't know where I'm going. Got this deadline looming, and so I just went, I'm just too fried to continue. I'm just going to go take a nice, long, hot shower. And so I go in the shower, and you go in the shower, and there's all this steam. You can't see anything. And there's all this noise. And in essence, you can't hear anything. It's just white noise. And so your two main senses, your eyes and your ears, are basically cut off. You're not using those in a hot shower. And then for me, I store my tension in my neck, so I've got this hot water pouring down on my neck, and I'm just zoning out. And after like 5 minutes, these little ideas started bubbling up that would be helpful for my thesis. Boom, boom.
Wow.
And I'm like, oh, that's good. I'll remember that. And then another one would pop up, and I link those together, and I write a little sentence in my head. Then I go, but I'm relaxing. I just, lean back against the water. And finally, I got so many ideas, I had to like jump out of the shower, go
Wow.
write this stuff down, soaking wet on my bed. You know, it, when we can kind of turn off that analytical part of our brain, the left brain
Hmm.
or whatever it is, and let the other side, that creative, right brainy kind of thing, free reign, then the ideas will come. But I think, a lot of times as writers, we're a little too critical, or we're trying to plan too much. I know people who write that they're just hanging to this outline. They've got it all mapped out, and that doesn't leave much room for serendipity. And
Right.
serendipity is like one of the best things ever. You're writing, and that's something. Excuse me. It's something I learned from James Hubbell, the artist that I used to work for. We were building this amazing curvilinear artistic thing with all these stained glass windows and stuff. Really amazing thing. And I was helping him, and I said, "Well, how much of this is planned?" I knew he had some drawings, and he had a little model. And he goes, "Well, I planned it about 2/3. You got to know where the electricity is going." And he goes, "But that extra third I leave unplanned, because as you're working, an idea will pop up you'll go, oh, we should do this right here."
Yes. Yeah.
And so you leave room for that serendipity. So anyway,
So the
all that is fits into this sort of this last book, and its mysteriousness. It is that sort of right brain creative source.
Okay. Now, what's happening at the start of your novel, Echoes Over Water?
Okay, let's see what happened at the start. The story, it's really a two there are two stories in Echoes Over Water that overlap, that go back and forth. One is modern, and the other is ancient. And so in the modern story, is some California guy is not really happy with his with his job. He's been divorced and stuff, and he gets interested in his roots, and he learns from his old family Bible, which we have. We have this old family Bible that goes back. It has the births and deaths in it. It goes back to the 1700s to Great Britain. So fascinating to look at it. So it has one, and he looks at that, and he decides he wants to go back and research, his forebears, and so he signs up on a boat delivery service that out of Maine, and they take this big motor sailor over to Great Britain to get delivering this boat from Maine to Great Britain. And so they go across the North Atlantic, but they island hop. So they go out of Maine, they go to Newfoundland, they go to Greenland and Iceland, and then on over. So it's that story, and he has adventures. He meets people across the way. Particularly, he meets a woman in Newfoundland who teaches him a lot about Celtic mythology. So this gets back to that NEH thing I learned about Celtic mythology. So the other story, so it goes on for a while, and his story goes on for maybe 5 chapters. At which point, it starts book 2, and you're in Great Britain, and there's an ancient guy, and the Anglo-Saxons, were kicking, Celts out, and the ancient stories. I mean, we still have. You could go into a bookstore and get the Voyage of Saint Brendan, and it's a story that was written in Latin, that we still have. We just you can get an English translation of it, and it tells the story of these Celt guys leaving the British Isles in these little boats and sailing to the west. And they have all these adventures. They meet all these weird things. They go to an island where a guy goes ashore and everybody's laughing. And he goes ashore and he's laughing too. And he gets back on the boat and he can't remember why he was laughing. And then they sail on. This is in the Brendan story. And they describe they sailed around the silver pillar in the sea. And you're going, oh, that's trippy. And then you realize, oh, iceberg. That's how they described an iceberg. And so there are these stories, and they get to this island of Emhane, the island of women, where immortality and happiness and that kind of stuff. And it's also called Avalon, and Avalon is the Isle of Apples. And if you know your King Arthur and stuff, he goes to Avalon, and in the Tolkien stories at the end, the elves, they all go over to the Western Isles. So it's a persistent myth in Celtic mythology that if you sail to the west and south, you get to these more paradisical islands and stuff. And so that's what these guys are following. They've got Brendan's book, and they are sailing across the North Atlantic, island hopping, Faroe Islands, Iceland, Greenland, Newfoundland. And at Newfoundland, they encounter the Beothic Indians who were there. So the two stories overlap. So one guy's going west to east, the other guy's going east to west. And they aren't linked, but there is some ineffable connection between these two guys. They have kind of similar experiences, and so what you end up seeing is the parallels in people in development. Barbara Tuchman, the great historian, she had a book called A Distant Mirror, meaning if we look into history, we find echoes, mirrors of how we are, conflicts that we have, the same sort of human universals that we encounter, people in the past encountered. And so you can use the past as a mirror to our own experience. And so that's what that whole book is about.
Now, how long was he living in the United States? He just wanted to research his family history. How long was he, Alan Griffin? How long was he in the United States when he just decided to take off to do this island hopping and to study more about his own ancestors
Yeah,
in
he
Britain
was
and beyond.
born and raised in California. Uh, grew up, had a job, got married, and at some point, in his probably late 30s, he that marriage falls apart. Uh, he loses his job. His life just kind of falls apart, and he's like, "Well, now what?" And so he realizes that he's sort of footloose and um, rudderless, and so he gets interested in that and said, "Well, what the heck? There's no time like the present. I'm going to go check this out." And so he
Mm.
researches this boat delivery service.
Oh, that without giving this story away, echoes over water. Does Alan find what he went after? Does he find what he sought?
Basically, yes. Yeah.
Okay.
I never like to write too neat of an ending, where everybody kicks their feet up and goes, "Yeah, that was great." So there's always a little bit of ambiguity, but basically, yes,
Oh,
he gets there.
good. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So he's satisfied at the end of this story, at least somewhat.
Hmm.
Now, here's another story of yours you wrote with the two words "the last" in it. Is the
Hmm.
last orange grove? Is this a work of fiction or nonfiction?
It's not. I mean, it's fiction. Yeah, all these are novels.
Okay. Can you
Yeah.
give us an overview of the last orange
Yeah,
grove?
this is actually the first book I wrote, and as my mom said when I was done, she said, "Okay, every writer needs to write their coming of age story. You've done yours now, and I look forward to seeing what you do next." Thanks, Mom. Um, but it was my family is well, I'm in Hawaii now, but my family was in California since the 1880s, and so that's pretty early for you know uh, for white folks to be there anyway. Um, uh, and so it's like four generations. And so that story is about a guy growing up as I did in a little, quiet beach community, and as Manhattan Beach did, it sort of got discovered, and it went from a little quiet beach community to a pretty ostentatious, um, crowded, hip place. So he's trying to deal with that, just trying to accommodate the changes, and I think we all do that. I heard another one of your guests talking about her her childhood town, the little town she grew up in, and she was talking about, oh, it's all changed now. It's all it's different than
Mm-hmm.
when we grew up, and
Mm-hmm.
it's a whole different society, and it's much more. Uh, Crowded and built up, and that's the same. I know a lot of people have had that experience. I've got
Mm-hmm.
some friends that uh, lived in Connecticut. They worked in the city, and they lived in Connecticut and went into the city, but they were complaining. They're going, "Oh my gosh, Connecticut is getting so built up," and
Yeah.
it's the same complaint. And it's probably the complaint that every generation makes,
Yes.
like
Yeah.
these
Yeah.
young people nowadays, they just don't get it, or I remember when I used to be able to walk through the
Yes.
countryside and
Ah,
and
that's when
and,
you know you're
and
getting
pick
over.
plums from the trees, so it has a bit of that, but for all that, it is a real societal shift. When they say you can't go home again, but when home is unrecognizable, and that happened in kind of an amplified way, I think, to Manhattan Beach. So I don't know anybody that I grew up with that could afford to live in that town. And on
Mm.
top of that, all the old houses, they've all been bulldozed. And now there are these mansions just cheek by jowl. There used to be empty lots, all around us. And everybody had a big yard, and the family played in the yard. And now the houses kind of take up the whole footprint of the
Mm.
lot, and you don't see the kids racing around on bikes, and that kind of thing. So the guy in that story, he's just trying to process that, and he's a surfer, and still has connections to kind of the local surfing community. But it's an area in flux, in change.
How were you able to in this story? And I'm wondering if there's an older character and a younger character who connect. How were you able to capture the older history and this modern day California reality in this one book, The Last Orange Grove?
Good question. Well, I'm older than I look. um, so, I mean, I know a lot of that just from my own experience, but also, my parents grew up there. They grew up in a part of Hollywood called Hancock Park, and they moved down to the beach in 1944. And people thought they were nuts because there was nothing down there. Why would you go down there? And to get there, it was before freeways and stuff. You had to go through countryside and farms and swamps. And so, you know, their stories, I grew up hearing their stories. And my dad's dad, my grandfather, he was a very well-known architect in LA. And so he built a lot of municipal buildings and homes and things like the Japanese Cultural Center and stuff like that. And his father, Ross, he was the first guy, Cline, to come to California. And he was a regional manager for, I think it was the Wabash Railroad when they came in like 1880. And in fact, on my wall up above me, I can see, I'm walking over to it now. There's a picture
Oh,
of these guys sitting in a Pullman car, and they're wearing natty suits, and my grandfather's in the middle. He's clearly the kind of the leader of the group, and standing nearby is a little alarming to see is the colored waiter, the classic Pullman, waiter. And so, there's those stories as well, that that I've drawn on. Plus, if you grew up in California back in the day, I don't know if they still do. In fifth grade, you studied the Spanish missions and Father Sarah and the development of the Spanish missions. And so I've written on that. I wrote a short story for a surfing publication about Father Sarah seeing these Indians canoe surf in Central California. But so I drew on that and did more research about the Spaniards, and that sort of filters through, and the Spanish rancho system. And so, I researched that, and I have a friend who is the great grandson of uh, the Dominguez clan, who had a big rancho in Southern California. So, you take all these things and throw them in a pot, and sort of stir them up and try to come up with a story. And so that's basically what I did.
okay. Now, your book, The Queen's English, it seems somewhat comedic. Was that your
Totally.
intent? And if
Yeah.
so, why did you choose that particular approach with the
It,
story?
uh, I put that out. It's just sitting on a site. You can find it online. Actually, it's free now. But I keep thinking I'm going to pull it back and rework it a little bit. But it is a spoof, and it is kind of a spoof on the English department. But it's it kind of is patterned after some of the old medieval stories that were quite funny and bawdy. I'm thinking like Canterbury Tales, The Wife of Bath, the Decameron, which are stories that are about the Decameron. When people would during the plague, they would leave the city and go up into the away from the contagion in the cities. And they would have all these kind of like sexy interludes and stuff, and it's just so funny to read these stories that are bawdy like that, but it's all in really euphemistic language. And what was the other one? Oh, I also studied in grad school the troubadours who invented the sort of courtly love, the music of the courtly love. And you always think of it as being so elevated, love with a capital L, but you start reading the lyrics and some of them are really racy. You're like, whoa, really? And so, but again, it's all in this kind of flowery, convoluted, euphemistic language. And so I just started writing this spoof on using those kinds of tropes. And so it's set in the future, and the U.S. has had all kinds of geological change, and so New York is now at the latitude of like Florida, and so there's palm trees in Central Park, and
Wow.
we no longer have
Oh my God.
it's no longer our form of government. It's a kingdom or a queendom, and the queen. She's not only the governmental queen, but she is also kind of like in England where the king or the queen, they're also the head of the Church of England. In this case, she is like the head of the English language, and so she makes all these decisions. She goes to progress through her realm, and has these sort of gatherings of the local communities, and people come to her and ask if they can make different changes to the crazy English language that we have. And it's just very lighthearted, and I don't know what else to say about it. It's a funny adventure. There's a term for a kind of book where the main character travels around, like in Don Quixote. It's where Don Quixote goes around and has all these adventures, and the adventures are sort of loosely connected by this journey, and that's called picaresque. And so it's a picaresque, lighthearted tale that has these little body interludes and all this kind of funny stuff. And there's a narrator who is super wordy, and so in terms of it being a spoof on the English department, I'm writing all these really long, convoluted sentences with parentheticals and stuff, and they're all correct. But they sort of, and this narrator is wordy but discreet when he's saying, "Oh, well, they disappeared," and well, I won't tell you what happened in behind closed doors, but. So it's an amusing tale, but it also in it, it's like throughout the book, I'm just name dropping pieces of literature and characters right, left, and center. And I was just kind of going, as if I was writing for the English department and said, see if you get that reference, see if you get this reference. Aha, okay. I better get you on this one. And so throughout the story and these places they go, in one place they finally get out to California, and they see all these people on the beach playing, and the queen realizes it's all these characters from literature. It's like it's the heaven of literary characters who have died in books. So it was great fun to write.
It sounds like it. Do you combine storytelling and music when you perform live as a musician? Do you combine those two, storytelling and music, in your live performances?
I often do. There is a bit of a danger to that, because a lot of times you'll hear somebody performing, and they'll say, well, I wrote this story about blah blah blah, and they go on this long thing. It's like, just play the song, dude. So I want to be careful about that, but there are times where that information can be any number of things. It can be amusing. It can help illuminate the song. There's one song that I have called Sunset News, and it came about from, I was sitting on a beach in Carpinteria, California, and I was only I don't know, a few hundred yards away from this old sycamore tree by this stream, and it is the site where when the Spaniards came up the coast, they found the Chumash Indians sitting there building a canoe, and and they called it Carpinteria, which means the carpenter shop. And so I was sitting there and I was imagining, I was looking out at the ocean, and there's some sailboats out there, and I was imagining what it must have been like for those Chumash guys. They're sitting there building their boat and they're looking out to sea, and one of them turns to the other and goes, "Dude, look at the big boat." You know, you know what that's like. Same thing happened in Hawaii, and happens all over, and it's where one culture intersects with another culture, often with bad results. But it is a fascinating thing. Something I've always been fascinated is when two cultures come up against each other, and what happens, how they communicate, what misunderstandings they have, and what languages they use. And like in Hawaiian, there's a pidgin. People speak Hawaiian pidgin. It's a combination of English, Hawaiian, a little Japanese, maybe a little Portuguese. And so people say, well, do you speak pidgin, or they are talking pidgin? Technically speaking, it's not a pidgin. A pidgin that has been spoken by more than one generation is a Creole, like they speak in New Orleans. It starts out as a bridge language between two groups that don't speak each other's languages, and they craft a simplified version of both. And so the verbs get stripped down, the articles and conjunctions and all those kinds of things kind of get stripped out, and you have a very sort of basic user-friendly language. So anyway, I don't go into all that detail if I'm going to tell the song, sing that song, but I will talk about sitting on the beach and imagining what it was like for those guys, because I want to put the image in people's heads. And for me, that is a big, big part, whether it's songwriting or it's writing novels, it's putting the imagery in people's heads. So like when I'm writing, I'm thinking about when I want to write, and I close my eyes and I try to picture it. And, I can get to the point where I'm watching it like a movie. And then I feel like, okay, I'm just going to transcribe that. And you can do that with characters as well. Once your characters are developed, they kind of take on their own personality, and you can close your eyes and listen to them talk. The way they might inflect a sentence, their attitudes will come through. And then, the writer is kind of this scribe, transcribing the stuff they're seeing. It's exhausting, but that's how I do it. So I really tried to think in sort of cinematic terms.
Okay. Now, as we start to close out today's show, can you please share 3 to 4 steps, Stephen, that you personally have found to be effective at getting the word out about your books?
Well, there's one, which I very much appreciate. It's been great talking to you. Other than that, that's not a part that I'm very good at. I'm really good at the creative side, but I'm really not a salesman. So I tend to, push things and, put things out on Facebook and do some marketing things like through Mascot. They have, a good department where they contact booksellers and that kind of thing. So that's helpful. I have also spoken at a couple of writing groups. So I was one of the lead speakers at the Vashon Literary Festival they had a couple of years ago up on Vashon Island in Washington. And what else? I don't know. I can't think of anything else. You tell
Okay.
me.
Are you working on any new books now that you can give us a glimpse into what you're working on?
people ask me, what's your next book going to be? And I go, I'll point to this book, and I go, what's that say? They go, the last book. And I go, yeah, that. And and sometimes there's a scene in Hamlet where Hamlet and Horatio are teasing this guy who's sort of an officious guy who's always using big words, and he stumbles to a halt, and Horatio, I think it is, turns to Hamlet and says, all his golden words are spent.
Uh,
And sometimes I feel like that. Oh, my golden words. But because I do other things, what's really, I really like this is, it's such a huge task to write a book.
hmm
Um, and for me, it takes years. And so when I get done, it's really nice to go, I'm going to write a song. It'll take me a week, And so right now I'm kind of deep in that, and I've been writing and recording stuff, and that I'll be putting out here pretty soon. And it's really fun because my son is a really great musician and engineer, and he lives overseas, and we collaborate. And his daughter, who's 15, is just a stunningly good singer. Uh,
Wow.
Charlotte, she's singing classical stuff. In fact, just last night in Singapore, her school did Mozart's Requiem, and she had a solo.
Wow. Oh
So,
my gosh.
so I've had her sing harmonies on some songs,
hmm
and and uh, and I just wrote it. She loves musical theater, so I don't write musical theater stuff, but I just wrote a song that could be maybe a sort of a slow song in a musical theater kind of thing, and I want her to sing it. And so
Okay.
when she comes in summer, we'll do that. So that's what I'm doing now, instead of writing a book, which is so daunting.
Oh wow. Where can Off the Shelf listeners get a copy of your books and your music if you already do have some music
I have,
recorded?
if
Just so
people
them.
go on that website, they can see, I think there are maybe 6 albums that are up there. But if you go on Apple Music or iTunes or Spotify, and if you put in my name, um, there are a lot of my albums out, but also singles. But a lot of people aren't doing albums anymore. They just release singles because, we don't play on CDs anymore. So it doesn't really have to be an album. So if you type my name in, like if you go to, say, Apple Music and put Stephen Cline artist, you'll see a ton of my singles, both instrumentals and songs. And then on Amazon, you can find uh, both this book, last book, and Echoes Over Water. So those are some places. YouTube, if you go on YouTube, I've got a ton of music videos and stuff like that, or as we say in Hawaii, like that. That's pigeon.
Okay. Oh my goodness, what a pleasure. We have had the absolute pleasure, a full enjoy of having on here on Off the Shelf Books today, Stephen Cline. And that's Cline with a C. And Stephen, he's very creative musician, photographer. We didn't touch on photography, composer, and book author. And some of the novels he's written that we did discuss today are the last book, The Last Orange Grove, The Queen's English, and Echoes Over Water. And I encourage you to check Stephen out. He's also a musician, and as he just said, he has music out here, albums and singles. But please check him out online at stephencline.com, StephenCline.com. Again, that's StephenCline, C as in cat, Line.com. Thank you so
Thank
much,
you.
Stephen.
Oh, it's been
Truly
a real
enjoyed.
pleasure, Denise.
Oh
I'm
yes, yes,
so
having
glad
you
we got to
on,
connect.
and
Great
look
fun.
forward to your other music. As I tell you, our listeners, I just thank you so much. You are incredible. You are amazing. Go out and create a fabulous weekend for yourself. See you back here next Saturday on Off the Shelf Books. Stephen, I'll send you a link to the show when it finishes streaming.
Sounds great. Aloha.
Thank you. Bye for now.
Bye bye.